Original entrance to the cave is just here. It's been filled in a little bit so that we don't get anyone sort of crawling down into here today, but this is where the explorers first entered the cave through in 1894. So when they clambered down into this one, they were having looked for, as I said, the back guano, so bat droppings, really good fertiliser, and that was what they were sort of, well, was part of their job anyway, they were paid to actually do. When they crawled into the cave though, they didn't find any guano, they found a nice pretty cave decoration, and so they decided to do tours instead. They put another entrance into the cave a little bit further. You can see that sort of pile of gravel just over there. That's where they first were taking people in through. It's just close to that. I'll show you what it looks like on the inside when we get down there. You'll probably be quite happy that we don't use that one anymore.
I get the idea from the signs that bushfires have come through here quite aggressively in the past.
Well, we haven't had one here for a very long time.
Haven't you?
But the problem with it is that just because it hasn't happened recently doesn't mean it won't happen in the future. If you saw some burning when you drove into the park, they did do a couple of prescribed burns.
Okay.
Around in that part sort of quite early on, so that they could actually just make it a bit easier to actually, if a fire does come through, you just reduce the fuel load by quite a bit.
The management of it, I guess, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Lots of advantages,
Yeah, if you can reduce the intensity of it by reducing the fuel, then it can often work out a little bit better for you. And when you move down, just wait at the bottom of the steps.
Sure.
It'll get a little bit taller when we go through.
Yeah, just taller down.
If you come out in here, you might be able to stand up a little bit more. It'll just be that bit higher.
Sure.
Now, when they first crawled through into the cave, that was where that original entrance popped in through. Okay. When they came through the cave, the floor level was all the way up here. So that was the sort of space that they were coming in through. So they did have to crawl. Now, the reason why the bats had never used the cave and why they didn't find guano in here is because of those small spaces. We tend to find them only really in the caves that have got the big holes in the roof, or in any large number in them anyway. It's just a bit easier for them to get sort of in and out of the caves. As they pushed their way in and they found all the pretty stuff, they thought they'd do tours instead, but they realised not everyone was going to want to crawl through the caves, and so they opened it up. What they decided to do was sink another entrance into the cave as part of that process, and so this is how they were bringing people into the cave originally. It wasn't until 1897 that they'd actually gotten funding from the government at the time to actually develop the cave. They got a small grant, but they had to dig out entrances like this, clear out the next set of steps down that way. You can sort of, I hope you can sort of understand why we wouldn't want to be using these ones these days. I mean, there's missing the bottom steps that are here, but they're not the most sturdiest thing. One of the reasons why we asked you not to bring food or drink into the cave is we do get things starting to grow down in here if anything gets dropped. But any organic material like the wood that's in here, it does start to rot away reasonably quickly. And you can treat wood and things like that, but if you don't do it properly, or even just over time, just wear and tear sort of wears it away. So these days we've moved more away from actually using, wood and things for steps in the caves to more, I know the handrails, they're still pretty good, bit of rust and things like that on them. But stainless steel, plastics, things like that, just to sort of limit our impact on the cave as much as possible. But
we feel the moisture on all of the railing.
You can,
It's very wet.
Imagine coming down this one and having someone up above you slipping down. It's not going to be a very fun experience for you. So that's one reason why we wouldn't use this. The door's still up there, so it's covered up, so you can actually see where it is. But in a pinch, if it had to be cleared out, you could. But that's what they used to think was safe.
Wow.
Back before they had things of occupational health and safety and all that sort of stuff. Now just be careful coming down the steps here. Like I said, feel free to grab onto the handrails as we come through.
The back of you can see the
fun.
Yeah, take your time.
It's a bit moist, isn't it?
It is. Caves are very good at holding moisture in the atmosphere. So if it sits quite hot, about 95% for most of the year. It doesn't vary that much. But this is what they found when they crawled down into here. A little bit different for us today, obviously. I mean, we're coming through with torches and electric lights and some very advanced cameras. But when they first came down into here, it would have all been by candlelight or lanterns, I suppose, if they had enough money to afford one. So it's a bit of a very pretty spot down in this one. It would have been a nice surprise, I think, for them when they crawled down into here. And this is obviously what they wanted to show people when they came to the cave on tours. So, like I mentioned, the fossils weren't discovered in the cave until 1969. There was small bits of material scattered up around the original entrance, but as they were coming through this bit, they didn't really find a huge amount, bits and pieces here and there. And so the early tours didn't really focus on fossils or even really the science or anything like that behind the caves when they first found it. They were more of a fairy tale tour. So, you know, you would have been coming through here with someone like myself and we would have told you about, you know, the fairy castles and all that sort of jazz as we went through. So the things have changed in a few ways down here in the cave. Although the cave itself is probably pretty much the same, especially in terms of most of the cave decoration. It does take a long time to grow. I said I did mention you ask but not touch anything, but if you did want to see what a piece of the stalactite feels like, you can.
It's heavy.
It is. It's got quite a bit of weight
It's
to it.
like stone themselves.
It is. Well, it's the
crystal, isn't it?
it's the
Yeah.
crystal.
It's a crystal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Very
Heavy.
dense, so very packed in. But it is made from the rock, so it's dissolved bits of limestone that are coming through. So
It is crystal.
yeah,
Same as a crystal. Oh yeah.
Lights up as well.
But just not the
it doesn't fit.
crystallized,
Yeah,
the
no,
added
it's
crystal.
it's a interesting process to get it forming in the cave. So you need to have water coming in through, like you can
Course,
see
yeah.
up here. So what happens is when the water, it's generally rainfall, like we don't have any sprinklers or anything like that above the cave, so we can tell you pretty easily where it's actually coming from. So as the water hits the soil up on the surface, it picks up bits of carbon dioxide. And so as it comes through into the cave, it just dissolves bits of the calcium carbonate away from the rock. Eventually the water drop reaches the cave, it degasses, so it releases the carbon dioxide, and then it starts to leave a precipitate behind, or a crystal, down here in the cave. It does some pretty cool things, depending on where the crystal is actually growing. So on the inside of the cave decoration, you do often find rings, just like you would in a tree, which is kind of nice when you can sort of look at it and think, oh, well, you know, this is the youngest bit, this is the oldest. They can date it, so they can use various other bits that have gotten trapped in the crystal to actually work out how old it is. And that's one of the things that they've done in our caves here, to actually work out the age of the fossil deposit, the big one that's in this cave that we'll have a look at. Also in Blanche Cave, they dated little bits of cave decoration to work out how old it is too. There's a cool bit of sort of research and dating and stuff that's going on, where they're having a look at the layers that are running through bits of crystal. This is a piece of flowstone, so one of the bits that forms on the floor of the cave, you know, very, very flat. The layers that are running through there, you know, because it relies on rainwater to grow, you can often look back and see, you know, if it's growing a little bit faster, it's probably wetter, slower, you know, smaller layers. It can also give us a bit of an idea of what the minerals, you know, up in the soil might have consisted of, where there's a lot of organic material, which would be some of these sort of orangey coloured layers that are running through there, as opposed to the whiter sort of calcium carbonate layers that are running through it too. So the crystal's quite pretty, but from a research perspective, it can also hold a lot of information inside of it too, which is kind of cool.
So between those two organic bands, what sort of time do you guys reckon it's between those two?
Couldn't really tell you with this one. It hasn't actually been dated, but given the time frame that it takes cave decoration to grow, it'd probably be for flowstone's not I'm going to say reasonably quick, but so a little bit quicker probably than stalactites or stalagmites, because the way that it forms is by a lot of water dripping down into the cave. So, I mean, potentially some of the layers could be hundreds of years or thousands of years, but it could be even longer than that. You can't really tell just by looking at it. if you did date it, you can have a bit of a guess, but your guess would be as good as mine with a lot of this stuff. It's not, you could, the bigger it is, the older it's going to be, but the size isn't even necessarily a good indication of its age as well. The water doesn't always come through in the same spots up on the roof of the cave. So in some spots where you look at it, like this is a really good area to actually sort of think about this, because when the first year that I started working here, I started towards the end of the year and then went through winter and then got to the next summer. And we had a reasonable amount of rainfall that year. It was kind of cool because that spot there is always quite active, just this one up here. You always get a reasonable amount of water dripping through. This one up here is a little bit slower, but still reasonably active. There's another spot just here. There's a few little drips that are sitting on the roof, but it doesn't tend to be as active as the other two spots.
Yeah.
And you can sort of pick up, how much rain's been going on, because that one there is reasonably quick, although it does slow down a bit during summer. This one gets a bit faster after winter, and a little bit later after that, if we get quite a bit of rain, this bit over here gets a bit faster. So it does vary an awful lot. But then you've also got to take into account that the cave has been here for a really long time, and so changes up on the surface do have a pretty big impact on what's going on down here in the caves. If it's really dry, if it was more, sort of sandy, like the old dune system, like sand and stuff sitting up on the surface, which would have been at points like that, then there wouldn't have been as much vegetation. It might have been easier for the water to soak its way through into the cave, which could represent some of those whiter layers that were running through it. Not as much vegetation up there. Not much of that organic material to get carried through. Maybe the water came through faster. At various points, there would have been a lot more vegetation, lots of trees and things like that, which would have then added to the sort of floor level where you might have had a lot more vegetation, which could have been the orangey layers or contributed to the orange layers running through it. And that might have caused less water to come into the caves as well, that might have soaked it up, but probably still maybe a lot coming into the cave. It's really hard to sort of just tell these things just by looking at it. So it does vary an awful lot, but at its base you can sort of still tell, if it's picked up a little bit or if it's slowed down a little bit, and those things can indicate things like ice ages and climate shifts and all that sort of stuff. So it's quite an interesting process looking at it. It's nice for a picture and all those sorts of things, but for the researchers it is also quite handy for working out a few of those more detailed aspects from the past.
How long do they think the cave's been here for?
So in terms of the limestone, it's between sort of 15 to 20 million years old, or that's the sort of time frame for it forming. The cave itself started forming about 1.5 million years ago, and they probably last drained out about 800,000 years ago, although there's quite a bit of variation in those ages that are actually there. We've had a geologist who's actually been studying the caves as part of his PhD project. He's been going caving for most of his life. He does cave diving, all these sorts of things, and he thinks basically the process started because we're actually on a fault line here, sort of running along the ridge that we're in at the moment. He thinks about 1.5 million years ago, or at least from sort of soil samples that they've taken way off the coast in the Otway Basin, where it looks like it's moved, and so they've got this evidence of it having sort of fractured a little bit, and that's what's sort of opened up all these cracks running through the rock. So the way that the caves are formed is by groundwater rising and falling out of that space over that sort of 700 odd thousand year period. Even the water moving through it slowly has eroded away, but he thinks it might have been a little bit of an acidic sort of component to it as well, which was then dissolving it away over time too. So we haven't had any major amounts of water in our caves for quite a long time, 800 probably odd thousand years or so. But really the only water that does come through is the stuff that's coming through from the surface. We need a pretty big sea level increase to actually push up into the caves again. We've also had uplift happen here too, where the sort of rocks sort of risen up slowly from other factors, and it means that top of the ridge you're quite high above sea level, but even in some of the really low sections of the cave, the deepest parts, they're never too deep as you go through, but even if you went into those odd little spots where it does dip down a little bit, you're still going to be probably a good, well, they think some of the stuff I read 10, 15 metres, but given how quickly the water table's been dropping in the area, it might even be slightly more than that. So there's quite a distance between us here as we go through on the groundwater. So it's still a long process, but geologically a pretty quick one, which is kind of remarkable. So when we're looking at our fossil deposits in the caves and the cave decoration in it, we can't tell you exactly how old anything is. You know, even in spots where it hasn't been dated, we can give you a little bit more of an idea in those bits. But in here, where nothing has been looked at, I can still tell you at its oldest, it's going to be, you know, maybe up to 800,000 years old, or when the caves last drained out of water, because it won't form if there's still water kicking around in here. And same with the fossil deposits as well. So we do have some sort of, I guess you could say, hard limits on sort of times and things like that for the caves. But his project's been very interesting, learning a bit about the, you know, working these things out. There's actually two types of caves that we have here in the park. There's ones where it's come up from underneath, but there's also spots where he's found where he thinks the water's coming in through from the surface. And then they're older caves, but they're a lot smaller. It's just that the process for them forming's been a little bit different. Wet cave is one where he's actually found that the younger caves that are lower down and bigger has actually joined through to one of the older caves up the top. That's the only spot that he's actually found so far where the two are linking up together. And when you go through the cave, it's very obvious where it actually is. You can sort of see it as you walk through. There's this sort of domey shape to the right hand side before you head down this set of steps, and you can sort of see, well, you know, this is where it's quite clearly just collapsed down into that space and the two are joined together. So it's kind of cool going through. When you go through with someone like that and they're explaining all their ideas, and they get very excited about it. It's kind of cool.
Cool.
Do you guys have any questions about anything in here that you'd like to ask? Is, like I said, if there's anything that you want to know, just shout it out. Don't be afraid to ask or anything like that. But we might keep heading through and head up to the next little bit.
Absolutely.
Now, I will have to turn the lights off behind us. Part of the reason why is just a bit of preservation for the cave. We get things that are drawn. I'll see if I can find... Oh, there's a bit. So you can see it on here, that green colour.
Yeah.
Kind of looks like, I only just thought of this the other day, and it actually does look quite close to it. You know when you get crayon and you're sort of drawing on not quite a flat surface and it sort of picks up all the lumps and bumps on it?
Yeah.
It kind of looks like that. It's what we call lamp flora, and it's a type of algae. And it grows when you leave lights on down here in the cave. So one of the reasons that we turn everything off as we go through is simply so that, you know, we don't get this growing down in here.
Yeah.
The way that we remove it is by spraying it with bleach. It takes the colour out of it.
Sure.
And then you have to sort of not wash it, but spray it down with water to try and get
flush it,
flush it all off. We do water down the bleach first of all, but you know, after that point, you still just keep putting water on top of it, and it gets rid of it all. I've had to do it, cleaning it off, and it's just a lot easier to turn the lights off.
Yeah, well that's it. Yeah, well it's not meant to have light down here, is it?
Exactly. And so when we go through the cave, if you do see anything like that, it's not. It is natural. So it's something that's obviously in the cave anyway, but we don't want it down in here just simply because of that problem that we have where we do have to remove it. It is caused by us. So I actually have a bit of an interest in it. I want to know how it actually, because it clearly doesn't survive on anything when it's down here. Like it needs the light to actually start growing.
Yeah.
So what's it doing when there's no light down here in the cave? Like it's had to come in somehow. It's either had to survive in here for a really long time, because this bit's probably never had light come into it, except for when we did. So did humans bring it in? Did something else bring it in, like an animal that might have been coming into the cave? We don't have a lot of evidence of them coming into this part of the cave at all. Or is it down here naturally? And if so, where did it come from? How did it actually grow? People probably know. I probably haven't looked in the right spot for the information yet, but these are all things that I find quite interesting and would like to know a little bit about. If you'd like to hop up onto the steps that are there and have a little bit of a look, you can. Just be careful with your...
Yeah, am I right? With the height? Yeah. Just, am I okay? Yeah, okay.
Oh yes, a bit water in here.
Yeah, it is a little bit damp in that spot. It seems to get enough coming through that it gets quite muddy just down there. When I was coming through and cleaning up the lamp flora that I was talking about, the algae that was growing, there was a bit just in under here. And it was in a very hard to get to spot. And so I had to sort of clamber up on the rocks and then try and shoot the little bit of bleach over it.
Is it the type of, like, perhaps if you put different types of, because it might have a lot of
well, we've actually
ultraviolet or something.
Yeah, we've actually changed over our lights quite recently, within the last year and a bit. Originally, it was the old, what are they, the tungsten filament ones?
Incandescent things.
Yeah, whatever they are, like the ones that you have in your house with the filament running through the middle of them. And that was what was in here. But we've switched them all over to LEDs for a couple of reasons. One, the lights last a lot longer. The lights that were in here, they were good and they were set up really, really well.
Yeah.
So it wasn't so much an issue of actually having to rip up wires and put new wiring in. It was more just putting in a light that was going to last a little bit longer, so we didn't have to constantly be changing light bulbs. You come through one day, you change all the lights, all the ones that are out, and you come through a couple of days later, and the other half of them have died. So it was a constant sort of changeover to try and do it. And quite annoying when you'd come through and you couldn't, your path light had died or something like that, and it was hard for everyone to actually come through the cave. So we had them switched over. They also use a lot less energy, but that UV question and what sort of light they're giving out with it would impact on the lantern flora and its growth is a good question and something that we haven't really looked into at the moment. But it still comes back to that, just turning the lights off, just not leaving them on for really long periods of time in the cave. Obviously prevention is better than cure for it. But if you can imagine what it's like in here with no lights on at all, like just pitch black darkness. That's what it was like for any of the animals that did inevitably get trapped in the cave. When we see the lantern flora growing, that's only because we've brought something into the cave. But, these animals, when they got stuck in here, just wouldn't have had anything like that to sort of, not that anything's going to really survive on it anyway, but, there's no plant life or anything like that down in here. Now, we'll keep coming up this way a bit. These are all the old floor levels in through here.
Okay.
So if you can imagine trying to come through, you're starting to duck down a bit with your, with your camera now, but imagine if you were having to crawl through like that.
Oh yeah, you wouldn't want to be claustrophobic, would you?
You wouldn't, no. One of my favourite questions to ask people on just the normal tours is if I had have said to you at the start that we had to crawl through the caves, how many of you would have come? And every so often you get a few hands that will go up, but most of the time people aren't too keen at the prospect of that.
Yeah.
Which is fair enough. Not for everyone. It's quite pretty through this little spot here. Bits of stalactite. One of the other things that we get pushing its way through in some spots, there's one of them just here, tree roots.
Oh wow.
So there's one just in through here. Alexandra Cave runs up through that way as well. Alexandra Cave is full of them in sections. There's a big section in the very centre of the cave, or centre of a couple of chambers, and it's all, there's a broken apart bit, but there's just tree roots all through it, and it's all been calcified, so it's had the crystal growing along the outside of it, like what's happened here. So they do push their way through quite deep into the cave. We're about 18 metres or so beneath the surface in this spot, so they can work their way in, all after the water and stuff that's down here. Now the other thing that I would like to show you here is just up here on the roof. And it is a hole. Quite a deep hole. If you want to come and have a look.
A manhole.
It is, yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get out there?
Well, they drilled through. So they basically...
Is that light in it?
No, that's just from my torch. Can you see how there's that metal plate up the top?
Oh yeah, it's a fan?
No, it's a cover to stop things from falling into the cave.
Oh yeah, because...
More animals.
Yeah, goes all the way up to the surface. So the reason why they drilled it through was to bring in the concrete for the floor. So in 1978, after they discovered the fossil chamber, they wanted to sort of redevelop everything to make it easier for people to get through the cave. And so part of that was actually redoing the floors and then putting concrete out.
Carry from there.
Exactly. The only other way into the cave, when they were drilling this hole, were the wooden steps. And so instead of bringing, you're dead right, instead of bringing everything in through there, they just brought it in through here instead. A lot of people think that they pumped the concrete in. They didn't. They actually mixed it up in the cave. They just lowered everything in through this point to do it. They also took a lot of the rock out as well. So when they were digging up the paths, they'd load it, they'd have whatever lowered down in, and then they'd take it out too. So the hole isn't natural. And what's actually happened is when they've drilled through the limestone, they've cut through all the little cracks that run through it that actually let the water work its way down into the cave. And so what's happened over time is as that water's come down through the limestone, it's eventually gotten to the hole and then just gone and then comes straight down around the hole. Originally, I think a lot of it probably would have been coming over to that flowstone. Just one of the anecdotal stories that I've heard from other people that have come through is they do remember it being quite wet over there before the hole was actually drilled. So because the water's been diverted to this point here, it's now leaving crystal around the outside of the hole. And that's what all this white stuff is that's actually growing around the outside of it. So that's little bits of cave decoration or speleoearth that's actually forming.
When was the hole dug?
1978.
So that's since 1978. Yeah.
And it's pretty quick here. I mean, quite a bit of water.
Yeah.
A lot of people are thinking, oh, you know, they get to this spot and they think, oh, it must be raining up on the surface because there's a lot of water coming in through here. It's not actually coming in from around the top. It is just coming in from the limestone. It's about, I don't know, 1.5 meters, 2 meters up. And that's how far it's actually sort of coming in. So the limestones, the water's coming in quite a distance through the limestone, coming down quite far before it's coming out around the hole here. So the only time I've ever really seen a lot of water actually coming in through from the top was New Year's Day about 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, 2 or 3 years ago anyway. And we had an afternoon, it was just pouring down with rain. The rest of the state was in a catastrophic fire danger day, but us down here in the lower southeast, it was still high or something like that. But I don't even know if they were predicting rain. I didn't have a look at the weather. But yeah, got to about in the morning. It was quite sort of warm. Sun was out, and then it got to about 11 o'clock. Clouds rolled in, and it just started bucketing down with rain. And we had masses of people coming in to do tours because they're all down at the beach. And so they can't enjoy it when they're down there, Robe and Kingston and that, so they all came to the caves. Anyway, I was doing the last tour through the cave here at 4 o'clock that afternoon, and it was just pouring in through the hole here. Just massive drips and stuff coming down through it. So it was a bit harder to have a look up the opening that day, but just to give you a bit of an idea, even with that much rain, we still didn't get a lot actually washing in through the opening.
Yeah.
So while the hole isn't natural, it is similar to the solution pipes that we will actually get forming naturally in the roofs of the cave. So what will happen is over time, water can dissolve its way in through from the surface and it will open up holes that are about the same size as this one. Sometimes they're a little bit bigger. I think one of the ones that was above the fossil chambers we'll have a look at was slightly larger than this one here. But this is a pretty good average for the size of them. When we go through Blanche Cave afterwards, the holes in the roof of that one are where the roof has actually collapsed in. So in those bits there, it's either from water still coming through or things like tree roots sort of breaking apart the rock as they push their way through. But in those bits of the cave, the rock has actually collapsed into the cave, opening it up to the surface. These are a little bit more from it dissolving through and in small amounts falling down into the cave as well. So when that happens, we end up getting animals trapped down in the cave. So if you can imagine things moving around on the surface and then taking a tumble into it, that's what happens slowly over the thousands of years that those holes are potentially open. So above the fossil deposit, and we'll actually be able to see one as we go back over the deposit, there are multiple solution pipes that were opened up in the past. All of them are now closed up, although the one that we'll have a look at, they have sort of opened it up again because they've put a winch house above it so they could pull material out of the cave a little bit easier. So what would happen is the holes would form, they'd often be quite well hidden, but even if they were out in the open, you'd still probably get animals falling down into them. They were quite hard to see a lot of the time, and so what would happen is the animals would move along, say kangaroo would hop forward, and then they'd just fall down into the cave. The other thing that would come in through the holes as well would be soil. So what would happen is the soil and bones would build up side by side, till eventually you'd get to the soil reaching up to the top and block up the hole, or an animal might seal up the hole, or something else might get washed in and sort of close it up, but eventually the holes will block up. So the fossil chambers, well, all the fossil chambers in this cave, as far as we know, are all completely sealed up at the moment. There's nothing falling into the caves, and so they've been blocked up for quite a long time. Even in Grant Hall, one of the other fossil deposits we'll have a look at, that one in there, still quite young, but still hasn't had anything falling into it for a long time. So, yeah, not the funnest of processes, I don't think.
So if you do any work here, just open that one to get
probably
easier rather than carry around.
Yeah, we do little bits and pieces in here from time to time. Like if we get a lot of mud, because when people come into the cave, they have it on their shoes and it's wet, it gets picked up and left behind. We often come and scrape the paths and that to try and clear it all off. But we haven't really done any work that's big enough in here to actually require opening that up. We probably wouldn't be doing anything in here in the future to actually do that. The way that we sort of manage caves, or people manage caves, it has changed an awful lot since they were doing things like this. Like, we wouldn't put concrete in the caves anymore. The current thinking is that you don't put anything into the cave that you can't remove. So obviously you can remove the concrete from it, but you're going to have to bring down jackhammers and things like that. Like, you could do it by hand, but it'd take you forever to get it done. So basically, if you can put something in the cave that's a lot easier to take out again, you're going to be doing the cave a lot of favours and a lot less damage. So you probably couldn't get this out of here without actually damaging a lot of stuff that's already down here. So when we get up to the fossil deposit, that's been redeveloped since this part of the cave was done. Like, it's been done since it changed quite a bit from when I first came in here when I was about 6 to today. It's been changed a little bit. Instead of having concrete in the sort of display area where we show you, where we get everyone to sit down and look at the fossil deposit, they've actually got pavers. So, you know, a lot easier to take them out. You just dig them up, load them up into a wheelbarrow and just wheel it out of the cave. Whereas with concrete, it's going to be pretty difficult to get that out. So that's just that shift in attitude.
Why they put concrete? Can't you just use their own?
Yeah, the limestone, I would have, most of our caves here don't, well, none of them actually have. I think Alexandra Cave has a small amount of concrete in parts of it, but it's not actually visible. It's all covered by soil. The limestone itself would probably be fine to actually walk on. It does a really weird thing. It cobbles a little bit when you actually walk over it for a long time, which I'd imagine would probably make it a little bit more grippier than anything. But yeah, for some reason they decided concrete was the way to go, and so. But like I said, it's really sort of frowned upon these days. It's not something that we can do.
Yeah, well, people's attitude towards conservation changes over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not saying that they probably didn't do their best to protect things back in those days, but attitudes to how we actually achieve certain goals have changed a bit in the interim. Now this spot here is called Laurie's Grotto. It used to be the end point of the cave tours prior to the discovery of the fossil deposit in 1969. So they were taking groups of people up into the chamber quite early on. One of the conditions of them actually being allowed to dig in there was the fact that they did actually have to talk to people as they came through. So if you had been doing a fossil cave tour in the early days, it wouldn't have been with someone like myself. It would have been, well, you would have done this bit with someone like myself, but the fossil part of it would have actually been done by paleontologists, which would have been pretty cool. They stand up and they talk to people about what they've managed to find that day, what they were actually digging for, or what they were trying to research, and just give people an idea of what's going on. In this part of the cave, though, they used to do something a little bit naughty. The stalactites that are up there are hollow. Stalactites form around the outside of a bit of cave decoration called a straw that's actually hollow. So they're different thickness stalactites. When they grow, when you tap them, will make a different sound. They play people a bit of a tune. Do you think we do that today? Definitely not. Yeah, they tap them with a little spoon or a hammer or whatever, and they use that to play a bit of music.
You can see a couple of them are snapped off, probably as a result of that.
I'd say so, yeah. Those two that are there are probably the best candidates for that having happen. Again, that's just that changing in attitudes to how we manage caves. You know, that was quite early on they were doing that, but playing the stalactites is something that's quite famous. Tantanoola Cave, they used to do it down there. Princess Margaret Rose Cave as well. Tantanoola Cave, they used to encourage them to take a souvenir home as they were actually leaving the cave. So those are all sorts of things that we just understand these days a whole lot better, and happily can say that people are a lot more conscious of it as they come through the caves. Like you guys with your camera, you know, you're watching as you come through, which is great. That's exactly what needs to be done to protect the cave, but people can still enjoy it in a variety of ways. So, you know, again, it's just lessening that impact that we have, and that's done by a whole variety of means, like, you know, like I said, turning the lights off, you know, minimising the amount of people that we bring through the cave in groups, and all those sorts of things, to try and preserve this so that we can show people well into the future. Now, I'll get you guys to head up to the next little bit first. So if you want to head up this way, just keep moving up until you see the next set of steps. So the little tunnel that Grant and Rod crawled through in 1969 to find the fossil chamber is basically running from where I am here all the way up to about the bottom of the steps. So when they first crawled through here, it took them about 4 hours to get through it. Quite a bit of time.
Yeah, you're right.
All the lights still on for two?
Yes. It's amazing. This is a big one.
It is.
Whew. It's a bit slower, isn't it? This part's off. The forming.
Yeah, a bit drier in here. Probably has a lot to do with the soil.
Soil,
Isn't it?
yeah.
A lot of the humidity is contained in it. So if not much water comes through, it sort of releases it out into the atmosphere of the cave.
So what's the difference with this? It's like all clumped at the top.
It's got a lot of what we call moon
Like
milk,
the salt.
I think. It's a different type of cave decoration. It's also called lublinite. There seems to be a mixture of bacteria and the calcium carbonate when it forms. But no, it seems that in some spots the bacteria is present, in some parts it's not.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's still not quite 100% sure with it.
Yeah.
No. Or it's just very white calcite.
Yeah,
Not
yeah.
quite sure. Now, if you'd like to come around and take a seat, you can. What I'd probably recommend is if you want to come around, take a chair if you want, but if you sit up the far end,
Yeah.
up there,
Oh, you can standing up, it's alright.
or you can sit down on the limestone if you want. Either way.
Oh yeah. Oh, it is pretty. That'd be nice for a souvenir.
That one is pretty cool. This is another example of that.
Yay. A different forming, like you.
There.
It's not line up, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's a bit of stalagmite.
Just you can see the way they drop.
Yeah. And again, you can see the dates, the ages. Well, the oldest bits would be in here, the youngest parts running along the outside.
Is that the way it would have been orientation-wise, or would it have been the other way around?
Well, I'm pretty sure it would have been a stalagmite, so a bit growing up from the floor, so in that sort of direction. Like I was saying with the stalactites, you often get a hollow tube running through part of it, but because it's grown like this and it's nice and sort of uniform
Just
all the way up, and it's got the evidence of it running along the outside, and not as pointy as well. I'd go more with a stalagmite than a stalactite.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.